Chapter 2. Moving Beyond Belief. The Delphic oracle said that I was the wisest of all the Greeks. It is because I alone of all the Greeks know that I know nothing. Socrates. Learning to not know. 2:1. One of my apprentices, let's call her Susan, was a math student who liked to share this story about an experience she had in drawing class. In the first class, they practiced a few shading techniques, and then sketched some fruit from a basket on the table. At the end of class, even her best drawings looked like circles and ovals rather than oranges or grapes. In the second class, they sketched some pots. Susan drew cylindrical forms all right, but they didn't look much like pots. Discouraged, she went to the instructor to drop the class, explaining that a math mind was obviously not equipped for drawing. The instructor listened and said that she should attend one more class before giving up. Susan agreed. 2:2. In the next class, a still life arrangement was there as usual, but was completely covered by a sheet of white muslin. Susan suspected the instructor was having some fun at her expense, but she took out her pencils and did her best to depict what was laid out before her. Afterward, she again asked permission to drop, but the instructor wanted to see her drawings. 2:3. Susan showed him, and the instructor told her she had greatly improved. Susan was confused. She looked from sketchpad to table and back again. It was true. Although the drawing was not very attractive, the forms depicted on the paper were very close to those on the table. Some of the folds of muslin in her drawing actually had the character of fabric, and there was an almost photographic realism to the shading on the mysterious shapes. When Susan expressed her surprise, the instructor told her that whether she realized it or not, she had been drawing the familiar objects from memory and association rather than from sight. The unfamiliar shapes made her have to see what was really there. 2:4. When we know something intellectually, but fail to experience what's right in front of us, we are only fractionally engaged with the world around us. On the other hand, allowing ourselves to know about something, and at the same time not know what it really is, provides a new relationship to our knowledge, including what we know, but giving it a back seat to our present experience. 2:5. The same is true in any instance of learning. In any sport, art, or craft, the techniques can only give us a direction. At some point, we must diverge from our reliance on intellectual data, let go of assumptions, associations, emotional considerations, and knowing. Once we open up to engage with what is truly in this instant, genuine insight becomes possible, and we reach our greatest levels of creativity. 2:6. What Susan's drawing instructor did was force her to come from not knowing. While Susan sketched fruit or pots, her knowing provided the idea of what was before her eyes. She was not drawing an apple, but rather her concept of an apple. When this familiar pattern of interpretation was interpreted, she was able to observe things with fresh eyes. Rather than seeing familiar objects, she saw what was present, and she saw it in terms of space, shadow, and light, all necessary distinctions for translating a visual image to paper. She had discovered for herself the difference between knowing what's there and perceiving what's there. Everyone takes the limits of his own vision for the limits of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer. Natural Contemplation. 2:7. Any valid inquiry begins with not knowing, or else it merely serves to confirm what is already known. Making a shift from knowing to not knowing opens up a space for new understanding to arise. Clearly, this shift is necessary for creativity, but many people don't realize that it is also the basis for contemplation. 2.8. Contemplation as a meditative discipline is looking into some matter for oneself, with the intent to discover what's true about it. To some degree, we all contemplate throughout our lives, but serious contemplation requires great discipline, great curiosity, or great stubbornness. As a child, I possessed 2 of those 3 qualities in abundance. I would frequently set my attention on some puzzling matter and wonder about it steadfastly until something more was revealed. Around the age of 6, for example, I became fascinated with the idea of time and began to investigate it. 2.9. Like most children, I lived in a pretty simple and yet continually emerging world, so it wasn't unusual for me to start wondering how it could be that now changed and became later, but was still always now. I had to check this out. I sat on the edge of my bed and imagined a future of standing up, knowing that once I stood, the experience would be as real as sitting. Then I would stand, and find myself in the world that I had only imagined. Although I knew I was only imagining the future kept coming to pass. 2.10. I remained fascinated by this puzzle for some time, standing and sitting. I repeated my little experiment over and over. Eventually, something strange began to sink in. I realized that my whole life was somehow already happening now. It was all now, even though I could only perceive what seemed to be occurring one piece at a time. Then I suddenly got something rather startling to me. Just like moving from sitting to standing, I would move from life into death, and experience dying as the present moment. I felt like there was no separation between my present experience of being a child standing in my bedroom and being an old man dying in my bed. This had a profound effect on my experience of life. Aside from being somewhat unnerving, it was probably the time when I first began to grasp what could be revealed through a persistent kind of wondering. It's not that I am so smart. It's just that I stay with problems longer. Albert Einstein. 2.11. Some of my questions led to insights, but most only led to more questioning. By the time I was a teenager studying martial arts, it was natural that I would spend as much time contemplating judo as I did practicing it. Unable to train as much as I wanted, I'd spend hours working out the throws in my mind. One day, I suddenly realized what the essence of judo was, and my skill took a giant leap forward. Virtually overnight, I became good at it, whereas before this insight I was no better than any other beginner in my class. From this experience, I became convinced of the power of contemplation to bring about insight. I wanted more, and naturally continued to investigate things on my own. But then at age 20, I took up the study of Zen. Zen influence. 2.12. The word Zen means to sit, and refers to a practice of meditation. The purpose for this meditation is to reach what Zen people call enlightenment, a leap in consciousness to a sudden awareness of the essential nature of being. Since such an experience cannot be achieved through the use of the intellect, it lies outside of what we know. It is literally unthinkable, which is why Zen has a reputation for being puzzling or nonsensical. Through prolonged meditation, the austerity of having no distractions, and the Zen master's unanswerable questions, the practitioner is pushed beyond his knowing. At this point, if he lets go of his mind, he is ripe for life-altering insight. Not knowing is an essential part of making such a leap in awareness. 2:13. Perhaps because Zen was simply a formalized continuation of the contemplation I'd been doing for so long, in a relatively short time, I had my first full-blown enlightenment experience. Over the years, I continued to have many other breakthroughs and enlightenment experiences. All of these contributed to my investigation into the nature of being human by providing recurring access to an awareness that is beyond knowledge or even thought. It may seem strange, but being able to experience no mind greatly increased the clarity and depth of my ability to investigate both consciousness and mind. 2:14. Throughout all of this study, contemplation, and research, one of the more significant discoveries came as I worked to discern the difference between what I personally experienced to be true and what I only believed to be true. It was here, beyond beliefs, dogma, and wishful thinking, that I discovered the awakening power of not knowing. Since it exists in a place that few think to look, it isn't common or popular, but venturing into this domain produces a freedom and provides new possibilities with each step. Everyone has access to this same facility, but the place we need to come from is buried under countless layers of beliefs. 2:15. It's true that beliefs are very powerful. It's not a new idea that to change anything about ourselves, we must change the beliefs from which our emotions and behavior are created. Several popular self-help trainings involve consciously exchanging one set of beliefs for another. For example, a person who lacks faith in himself might try to override his negative self-image by deliberately formulating a belief that he is intelligent and capable. If he can maintain this new perspective, he will begin to interpret events differently, and his more positive interpretations will support an increasingly positive view of himself. Although this kind of work can have a positive effect, it does nothing to increase our understanding of the real nature of mind or the self. Relating differently to beliefs. 2:16. If manipulating our beliefs is this powerful, if we can alter our sense of self in the world simply by switching to a different set of beliefs, imagine how powerful it might be to get free of our beliefs entirely. It never occurs to us that this is possible. In the desperate scramble to feel better about ourselves, it's easy to forget that whether we act from a belief that we're worthless or important, neither viewpoint is the truth. It's a belief. In fact, most of what we think of as ourselves is simply an amassed collection of beliefs and assumptions. Fabricating a few more optimistic beliefs might help alter some aspect of our behavior, but it does not and cannot lead to a more genuine sense of self. 2:17. The good news is that we don't have to live exclusively in relation to our beliefs. Rather than manipulating ourselves into exchanging one set of beliefs for another, we can look into what beliefs are. At this point, it may be hard to understand what is meant by this. Don't worry. A large part of our work here is learning new ways to think about some very ordinary things. In fact, the more familiar they are, the harder it can be to see them in a different way. 2:18. Here's an analogy that's useful for approaching this belief business. If all you've ever done with your car is put gas in it and drive around, it would mean a huge shift in both focus and effort if you decided to start learning how cars work. Each of these activities concerns a car, but understanding the mechanics involved is very different from using one for transportation. Being driven by your beliefs is a very different matter than consciously understanding how it is your beliefs are created and what purpose they serve. 2:19. If all you've ever done with your beliefs is just believe them, taking a look under the hood at what you hold as true can be a radical shift. It's an investigation that takes place within yourself. So while it may sound strange, it's not inaccurate to call this direction more intimate than blindly following your beliefs. If you've been reading mindfully, you've probably noticed something of this already. Such self-intimacy on an immediate experiential level can be exhilarating, as well as uncomfortable at times, something like getting a glimpse of the unexplored frontier of your own consciousness. So while it's wise to be prepared for some sort of reaction, all you need to recognize for now is that it's possible to make a shift regarding your beliefs and open up to a genuine experience of this moment. 2:20. Once we truly experience the nature of beliefs, we can decide to keep those that we consider empowering or otherwise useful, or take steps to detach ourselves from all of them if we choose. And while detachment from something can sound cold or emotionless, it also aptly describes an experience of freedom, of unencumbrance, and that is what I mean here. I'm talking about opening up to the possibility of experiencing what's true rather than believing whatever comes to mind based on the same old presumptions. 2:21. Shifting from belief to experience is like the difference between, say, trying to eat the picture on the menu rather than the food itself, or the difference between memorizing some knowledge instead of grasping the truth of what's being said. However you can imagine it, the point is that not knowing allows access to what's real. Making this shift, your personal experience becomes new and fresh, taking on an immediacy and authenticity rarely felt by most people. And perhaps, more important, no matter what becomes known or unknown, you remain secure in your honesty and realness, and this affects you in a deep way that is not easy to convey. It needs to be experienced for oneself. A prerequisite for this transformation is the ability to embrace a state of not knowing. Only when we realize that beliefs are not the truth will the door of possibility open so that we can experience what is true. Creating a new perspective. 2:22. We're told that once upon a time people thought the earth was flat. Now we know better, and so we look back at those people as ignorant, even silly. Pretty arrogant of us when you think about it. What makes us so certain that everything we know today is true? Any reasonable person will admit to the possibility that some of what is currently known, even taken for granted, is likely incorrect. If we consider the matter with care, we will conclude that fallacy is inevitable, and some of what we confidently hold as true now will eventually prove false. But how can we discern what this is? Within all that is known, how do we separate our mistaken assumptions from what is factual? 2:23. Imagine you lived long ago, and that you are one of the people who think the earth is flat. Don't blame yourself too much. It's a culturally accepted assumption of the time. Remember, you do not imagine it could be any other way, and the earth's flatness is quite observable. When you stand on high ground and look out, you can see the landscape going on into the distance quite horizontally. Yep, it's flat all right. When someone leaves your village and travels as far as anyone you've known, they come back pretty much by the same route. Things have always been this way, and it all makes sense to you and everyone you know. 2:24. Actually, the idea of a flat world fits pretty well with what we can personally observe about up and down, here and there. In fact, it fits better than a round one. If I drop a ball to the ground from the upper window of my house, and you drop a ball from the upper window of your house across the valley, and John drops a ball from his house in a faraway town, there is no reason to suspect that the ground each ball hits is not on the same general plane or level. We could easily assume that this ground is the same flat piece of dirt with bumps all across the earth. This flat earth also translates well to a flat piece of paper, much better than trying to make a global map flat. 225. And consider this, although we all know it's true, who among us takes the time to even imagine that we are currently spinning around at roughly 25,000 miles per hour, or that in space, up and down don't exist? Even though we believe it's a fact that the earth is round and spinning, we generally live every day as if the sun rises and sets, moving from one side of our flat piece of terrain to the other. Even in the face of our current beliefs on these matters, our daily view actually ignores them and functions instead within the same perceptual reality that was so for people in times past. The idea of a flat, stationary world is not as far-fetched as we make it seem. It is only our cultural arrogance and fear of being seen as ignorant that compels us to place such notions in the category of foolish old misconceptions. 226. Now, once again, pretend that you live in an era in which everyone assumes the world is flat, but this time try to imagine that you yourself aren't so certain that it is flat. Since we live in a time in which we are told the earth is round, it's pretty easy to imagine that we don't know the earth is flat. But take the time and use your imagination to pretend in earnest and make it real. Rather than just thinking about it, really get it as if it's an experience you're having in this moment. Try to feel as if everyone around you knows the world is flat. No one ever really had to sit you down and explain it. You just know it along with everyone else. But for some reason, you no longer feel certain. You refuse to unquestioningly believe the current cultural presumptions, choosing instead to admit that you don't really know what shape the earth is. 227. What are you left with? What occurs in your mind and perspective? Probably the possibility of the earth's roundness arises, even if you wouldn't think of it at the time. As a matter of fact, all sorts of possibilities can arise. Maybe it's a cube, or a half-sphere, or maybe it has a different nature from anything conceivable. It's wide open. This is the nature and power of not knowing. 228. To investigate further, it's important to use a current assumption about which you feel certain, and yet not something you'd find too hard to let go. You can try not knowing anything you like, but a round planet serves well. Explore your own direct understanding of the earth. Without using hearsay or second-hand images, experience that you do not actually perceive the shape of the earth. When you do this, what do you get? If you don't notice a shift in your awareness of some sort, work on it until you do. Get that in this moment you personally do not actually know what shape the planet is. I refuse to be intimidated by reality anymore. What is reality? Nothing but a collective hunch. Lily Tomlin. Empty your cup. 229. At the root of every true inquiry, from Zen Buddhism to the cutting edge of science, is openness and not knowing. Within these endeavors, there is always a possibility that something true or profound can be discovered. But what frequently stands in the way of even the most sincere and honest investigation is our tendency to grab too quickly for answers and beliefs. Reaching the edge of our own understanding, we confuse not knowing with ignorance and quickly grow uncomfortable. We desire a hasty departure from the state of non-understanding that is our real experience. The usual way out is to retreat to our familiar beliefs or adopt some aspect of hearsay or common opinion. But of course, this rules out discovering anything new. 2:30. In more spiritual pursuits, a peaceful clear-mindedness is considered laudable and, to the newcomer, somewhat mysterious. If we look closely at this state of mind, we find that at its base is simply openness, a willingness to not know. This aspect of wisdom's clarity usually goes unrecognized, since what followers most often seek is knowledge and answers. They don't realize that these cannot produce an experience of the truth. Instead, they suspect that the sage is in possession of some vast body of knowledge that he could impart to any worthy person of his choosing. Independent of any knowledge or understanding he may have, the truth of his wisdom is more likely based on the nothing that not knowing provides. Since this is impossible to understand, for most people such wisdom will always seem mysterious. 2:31. True understanding demands experiential investigation. In undertaking this work, your job must be to consciously experience whatever is true regarding your own self and life. As you read, be aware that the answers may not be immediately intelligible, but your ability to look into your own experience is always available. With this disposition, our work proceeds authentically toward a direct personal experience, and not from hearsay or hasty conclusions. This can be a painstaking endeavor, but in the end it is real. Without direct and first-hand insight, we remain unable to validate the ideas proposed by any method of inquiry, including this one. A university professor went to a master to inquire about Zen. The master served tea. He poured the professor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched and then finally exclaimed, "Stop! The cup is full." Like this cup, the Zen master said, "You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" 2:32. As you start to look into the issue of knowing and carefully observe your own mind, perceptions, and experiences, you'll probably find it surprising and a bit unnerving to realize that much of what you think you know is actually just a belief. It may be true or it may be untrue. Don't worry about that for now. The issue is you take for granted that many ideas are true when you really have no personal experience that this is the case. There is a new kind of freedom that comes from separating the truth from what's believed. This action allows you to let go of your own knowledge and open up to freshly experience this moment without presumption. 2:33. Start making a distinction between what you merely believe to be true, because you've been told it's true, by whatever source, family, friends, religion, science, culture, books, teachers, and so on, and what you have personally experienced as true. If you haven't had a first-hand encounter with whatever it is you say is true, then call it a belief. This encounter could be in the form of personally undergoing an experience with something, personally having an insight, or grasping that a thing is true, or having perceived for yourself the fact of something occurring. Other than merely concluding something in your own mind, or using your intellect to logically assume it must be so, if you've experientially validated the truth of something, then call it an experience. If not, it is a belief. Emptying your cup exercise. 2:34. Go through everything you believe or hold to be true. As best you can, bring to mind all that you know. Everything that comes up for you that you consider true, or assume is true, ask yourself whether you have actually experienced it or if you just believe it. Certainly this will take some time, and you may often be unclear whether something counts as a belief or as an experience. Take all the time you need, and if you still aren't clear, set it aside for later contemplation. The vast majority of what you know will turn out to be beliefs. 2:35. Try to come to grips with the fact that the truth of these beliefs is actually unknown. Allow this unknown experience to sink in. The more you can free yourself of countless beliefs, instead staying with a sense of not knowing, the stronger your sense of the present moment will become. Although the beliefs might be numerous and varied, the not knowing will always be the same. It is only one experience, and it is always now and always true. Use this to open up and wonder about the nature of your awareness of this very moment. 2:36. The above exercise is not something that needs to be accomplished all at once. The point is for you to start opening up to seeing the ways that beliefs affect your life, and to begin not only to question their validity, but to open up beyond any belief, valid or not, to experience this moment as it is. In the next chapter, we'll be looking into this matter on a less personal level, our shared inheritance of cultural beliefs and assumptions.